Hi, everybody. I just want to say thank you so much for coming. It's really nice to meet people who I've talked to on the phone or received letters from but never met in person. So thank you for that. And for anybody who's new, who's here, thank you so much for coming. I know that some people just saw the notice on Facebook or on our website or whatever and decided to come out. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. So today I'm going to talk and highlight one campaign that has been part of Animal Alliance for 30 years, and that is to try and stop the sale of dogs and cats to research facilities across Canada. Now, this campaign I picked because it is of critical importance and highlights the importance of our involvement in electoral and legislative politics in moving our agenda forward to protect animals and the environment. In the mid-'80s, which seems a lifetime ago and is certainly for me and probably many of you as well, I was at the Toronto Humane Society, and the Toronto Humane Society launched a campaign to end the sale of lost pets from pounds to research facilities. And the idea to make this issue and other animal protection issues political was the brainchild of Stephen Best, who's sitting at the back here, who's had a long history, who is a political advisor to animal welfare and animal protection groups, and is our chief agent for our political party, the Animal Protection Party of Canada. Now, this campaign was an early attempt at direct political engagement of the pound seizure issue in the political realm. And the repercussions of that, it was really interesting, were felt throughout the society itself, throughout the research community, and at the highest levels of the provincial government. And the controversy around it was pretty intense at the time. Sadly, instead of embracing the discussion and the debate and facing down its detractors, the society backed away from advocacy work largely and has ultimately reverted to sheltering animals, which of course is really important, but wish they had remained in the advocacy part of it. So in 1990, when Animal Alliance formed, we took up pound seizure as one of our inaugural issues, thinking, well, we can get it solved pretty quickly. We took Stephen's advice and used the political tools necessary to try and change things. And we had to fight this issue at 3 levels of government: the federal government under the Canadian Council on Animal Care, which is a voluntary body that governs animals in research; at the provincial level under the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, and that manages the Animals for Research Act; and at the municipal level for the municipalities that decided that it was okay to sell their lost pet dogs and cats to research. And of course, the key to resolving the issue in Ontario was amending the Animals for Research Act, which would actually implement a ban. But that was a longer term effort that we were working on. And while we were working on that, we decided to go to each of the municipalities that we knew were selling animals to research and ask them to stop. And virtually every single one of them did. It was incredibly successful. And it was so successful that the research community claimed that they were being denied research animals because we were able to dry up their source at virtually every pound that we knew was giving. So during the years between 1991 and 2001, the numbers of dogs and cats, those both pets and those that were purpose bred, used in research in Ontario dropped from the thousands, many thousands, down to the hundreds, and remained that way for a full decade. We were never able to find out exactly what pounds were still giving, but clearly there were, but in much smaller numbers and for much fewer spots than was reasonably before. And then in 2002, that changed again. The number of pets that were being used surpassed the numbers of purpose-bred animals that were being used. And yearly, the numbers of animals that were pets from research averaged about 4,700 dogs and cats, which was higher than when we started our campaign in 1990. So this occurred despite Animal Alliance's ongoing campaign to end the practice, and our problem was that we were never able to overcome the political barriers that we needed to achieve real change. The research industry wielded significantly more political power than we did, and so the private members bill we had died, and the government under the day that we were dealing with it was Bob Rae and the NDP, refused to amend the act to protect pets in Ontario. So we plugged along for a number of years, and then 2017, with the help of the cruelty-free cosmetic company Lush, we launched another intensive campaign, which we now call No Pets in Research. Lush supported that and in fact encouraged a political solution as the only long-term resolution. It's very interesting because most funding bodies don't want you to deal with the political aspect, but Lush was front and center in that regard. A year ago, our West Coast campaigner Jordan Reichert was seen on video asking the Prime Minister what he was going to do to protect animals. He got invited to, he was at an event that Trudeau was doing, a town hall, and he was invited to ask the question. So Mr. Trudeau tried to diminish Jordan by referring to him as a shirt and tie activist. He avoided answering the questions by blaming the animal rights community for the conflicts with the animal industries and claimed that it was our responsibility to go talk to the farmers and resolve these problems that the government didn't want to resolve. But Mr. Trudeau's response, I think, was very instructive. He knew he was taking no political risk when he shifted the blame from himself and refused to take responsibility for any of the government's actions. What that tells us at this point in time is that environmental and animal protection movement is largely politically irrelevant. Parties of all stripes know that they can ignore such issues, actively promote activities that they know are cruel and harm animals, and risk no political peril. Now, to most of us, that sounds pretty depressing and discouraging, but I would argue not. I would argue that it's depressing to continue doing what we're doing when we know it doesn't work. And so there's the simple reality is that we have to change our strategy to bring about real lasting change for animals and the environment. And we know that that real change is possible. Last June, Jordan and I attended a conference about farm animal transport, sponsored by the Party for the Animals in the Netherlands. And we have a couple of people here who have actually been to Party for the Animals conventions, so they know of what we speak. The party, interestingly, in the Netherlands is dedicated to enshrining the rights of animals in the democratic process worldwide. And I would say that's a pretty lofty goal. But when Jordan and I left the conference, we were incredibly inspired. We met animal rights people who understood how critical politics is in the role of making change for animals and for all life on Earth. We met people from 22 countries, people who were actively engaged in politics. Many of them had established animal rights parties, and some of them were elected at various levels of government. And currently, the Party for the Animals have 50 representatives elected from top to bottom in their own country of government and also in the European Parliament. So we know it can work. And we saw that real political change was beginning to take hold in the Netherlands and across Europe. However, we have a more significant hurdle to cross, and that is we have a voting system called first past the post. But despite all the hurdles that we face, we have had victories, so we ought not to despair. We've won protections for animals, and I'll just name a few. With Stephanie was working, we had won a Canada-wide ban on the transport of compromised farm animals across Canada, and that remains in place today. We brought an end to a cormorant cull in a provincial park in Ontario. We won an end to the live terminal surgeries that veterinary students were doing at the University of Guelph, and that remains in place today. We stopped a number of deer culls in British Columbia and in fact engaged in a number of very progressive non-lethal management activities there as well. And we successfully intervened in the Supreme Court with ZooCheck and lawyers Leslie Bisgold and Clay Ruby to prevent the patenting of life forms, and that was around the patenting of the oncomouse, the mouse that develops cancer for research. So victories are possible and probable, and we should continue to fight those fights. But we just need to recognize that how we fight these issues is insufficient. The fight for fundamental change in our society requires us to be more politically engaged, both during elections and in between. We need to overcome our cynicism, and I know this is hard when we watch the stuff about SNC-Lavalin and Doug Ford doing all sorts of different things, but we have to overcome our cynicism about politics and politicians in order to make lasting change for animals and all other life forms on Earth. With over 50 elected representatives at all levels of government, the Party for the Animals in the Netherlands can't solve all the problems, but what it does is it provides constant pressure to move forward on issues and not backward. We won the spring bear hunt, and then 14 years later we lost it. We don't have a mechanism in Canada to keep pushing our issues forward, and so that's what happens in the Netherlands. That's what the Party for the Animals allows. So Animal Alliance has always used politics as a tool to advocate for real legislative change for animals, for the environment, and for our democracy, as we've been to court to try and improve our democratic possibilities. So how do we start? How do we begin to achieve what the Party for the Animals has achieved? We have a much more challenging job, but we have, I think, we have potential to start. So the first thing we need to do, I would argue, is that we need to acknowledge and embrace the importance of involvement in electoral politics. It's key to the fundamental changes we need to protect animals and the environment. We need to develop election campaign expertise at all levels of government, gathering together political researchers and strategists like those in major political parties who will help us lay out strategic plan for electoral involvement and ways to change the political composition to perhaps a minority government so that governments become more responsive to our issues. We need to, it's a thing I've called Riding Watch. I'm not sure it's a really good name. We have 338 ridings across Canada. What we really need are a person or people in each riding that would be prepared to take on fundamental research in that riding. Who's running? Who are the candidates? What are their positions on things? Who's the elected person? What's the person's voting record like? Where are the events? And then getting people during the election to go to all candidates' meetings so that constantly across Canada, in every single riding, people are asking the questions, what are you going to do to protect animals and the environment? And I think if that happened, we'd have a story. We'd have a conversation that we are not having now in terms of politics and getting the government and elected officials to comment on it. We need to campaign for a minority government. That's what we're intending to do in the upcoming election. They tend to work better for us because there isn't the arrogance of just being able to do what they want and not listen to people. And we need to fight for change so that we get rid of the first past the post system for proportional representation. That's what's working in the Netherlands, that's what's working in many countries in Europe, and that's what we need here. So without serious political involvement, I think we'll continue to see the demise of bills such as C-246, which many of us gave our heart and soul to. That's the Modernizing Animal Protections Act. We will see amendments to animal transport, although they're somewhat improved, backslide from what they could have been because of industry undermining or industry expressing their political desires. And we will continue to fail to meet our climate change targets. And we will continue to be a throwaway society, which is built on an economy that's built on ever increasing consumption, which it clearly is not sustainable. And we'll continue, as I've done for many years, to go hat in hand and beg for change and face a dismissive and arrogant Trudeau who would not allow even the most minimal changes to the criminal code. And we'll face a Ford government that seems intent on encroaching on protected areas and facilitating the extermination of double-crested cormorants, for example. I think we have a real opportunity to acquire real political power, differently than in the Netherlands, but nonetheless real political power. The Animal Protection Party has been in existence since 2006, and it's the only animal rights political party in Canada. We have an incredible opportunity at the time when voters are deciding how they're going to vote, when candidates who are seeking re-election are more inclined to listen to us, to talk to them about our issues. We can run candidates. So if anybody would like to be a candidate, that would be wonderful. And we can run ads and engage in the national debate about issues that are of importance to us. So we begin to change the dialogue. I think we should stop begging, and I think we should become political. We should start as a goal to acquire sufficient political power that elected parties will begin to listen to us and begin to understand that not listening to us, there are political consequences. Thank you.